Resume recording. Right, should we go for it then, Kalina?
Definitely.
Perfect. Right, well, just a massive thank you to everyone for joining us. So you've hopefully you're in the right place. So welcome to our session on recruiting and inducting remotely, learning from lockdown. We'll just do very quick introductions before we kind of start to go through kind of an overview of the session. So my name's Graham Atkinson. I am the Director and Lead Consultant for Atkinson HR Consulting. We've been around for about 3 years. Prior to that, for my sins, I worked at the National Union of Students for 5.5 years as their Director of People and Governance. And before that, I've had a career working in student unions. So I worked at Northumbria Students' Union, Teesside Students' Union, and also what was at the time Ripon and York St John. Kalina?
Thank you. My name's Kalina Wright. I'm the CEO at Sunderland Students' Union. I've been there for 3 months, and so that was one of the reasons that Graham asked if I'd work with him on this, because actually, although I'm the CEO there, I've not actually physically been to Sunderland as the CEO. Prior to that, I was at De Montfort Students' Union, starting there in 2007 as Democracy and Representation Coordinator and leaving back in April as the Head of Membership Services. And before that, I was involved in sort of student unions ever since graduating myself. So I'm aware of them, having worked in a number of them.
Okay, great, fantastic. So again, hopefully after 4 months of this, everybody's pretty familiar with Zoom and how life on Zoom works. But just as a reminder of some of the ground rules for the session, really, if everybody can stay on mute unless you're talking. If you're having connection issues, try turning your video off. We are going to try and make this a little bit interactive, so it's not just listening to me and Kalina talk. We are going to be using kind of breakout rooms at one point, and we're also going to be asking you to annotate a slide. So you should all have that option to have an annotation bar. So you get to have a play with that. Hopefully you've done other bits of learning and development on Zoom over the past few months and are familiar with this. If not, just drop a note, or if you're struggling with any of it, just drop a note in the chat bar, and either me or Kalina or John possibly will kind of help as we go along. And then just the other thing I think to say in terms of ground rules is hopefully have fun. Try and engage with the session. Feel free to use emojis, the chat bar. If you've got any questions as we go along, drop it into the chat, and one of us will pick it up. In terms of what we are covering, then during the session, we want to do a couple of things really. So as Kalina said, Kalina's joined kind of Sunderland and was inducted during lockdown. We've also been through, so both as a business and working with some of our student union clients, have been involved in helping a couple of organisations recruit during lockdown as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of our experiences. We're going to talk a little bit about some of our learning during that, what worked well, what didn't work quite so well. And then we're both going to share some of our ideas around what this might mean for the future, and what we might plan on doing differently as a result of some of that learning. Okay, I think this is you, Kalina, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. So in terms of some of the best or worst experiences of either recruitment or induction, I'm purposely reflecting on the best experiences to give you guys an opportunity to think about the worst ones. I didn't have time to talk about some of the worst ones because we'd just be talking for the whole hour about me. As I said, I've been involved at De Montfort Students' Union for a number of years, and I've developed some of my practices as a result. So in terms of recruitment, our adverts purposely contain more information about the organisation. So what I thought was useful is seeing some of the recruitment packs that come out for chief execs. And actually I was like, why don't all of our adverts look similar to this? Why is it just that you have to get to a particular level in the organisation to have any understanding about what the values really are and what the mission statement is, where you are in that journey? So we purposely included information about the organisation, about its future, about the board setup. In addition to that, we were quite late to the party in terms of being quite explicit in how we would assess criteria. And so this was relatively easy to fix, and it just meant adding a column to the person specification indicating whether our assessment methods were based on documentary evidence or assessed it in the application, the interview itself, or the test. And actually that was really quite a useful experience because it enabled me to reflect on the questions that we would ask at the interview, but at that point. And that was just so that I could kind of ensure that I had understood and could appreciate where the applicants were coming from. Although we have a HR department, I always encourage the chair of the panels to personally contact any shortlisted candidates over the phone and to confirm their time slot and to give them a heads up about the interview presentation. And one of the reasons I did that was because it just meant that we weren't constantly chasing our tail to see whether particular people could attend at a particular point. And we knew as far as possible that that timing suited them. So I remember watching a series on Channel 4 about how the whole of the organisation could contribute to that, that recruitment decision. And also as a result of attending an assessment centre myself, we kind of thought that actually were interviews just the best way to get the candidate that you wanted. So at my suggestion, sometimes criticised by other colleagues, I tried to make an assessment centre feel to all of the appropriate job opportunities, just because I think that that gave the candidates the best opportunity to shine. And sometimes what I'd want them to create out at the end of the day was a tangible outcome that was either presented to myself or the staff, the CEO, or just something that we could reflect on to see how they'd work together. And I think that worked really well. So although I acknowledge that it can be overkill and requires some additional commitment from the perspective of those involved, I remain convinced that that is a meaningful opportunity to see how staff can work within your organisation. And I stand by that because during the occasions that we've done that, I have had candidates leave the process and say, I'm really sorry, I'm not sure that this role is right for me. And I think that had they only just undertaken the interview itself, we would never have known that. So that was one of the sort of best things that I've done in terms of recruiting. And in terms of inductions, I'm hoping that you're all from student unions and familiar with that, but my best experiences of induction always come from the offices, but I think there's definite learning in terms of how we can apply this to inductions for all staff. So I think that when it comes to officers, they are given an opportunity to spend some time with outgoing officers to understand the role from that perspective. That's not necessarily something we always apply to our staff. Outgoing officers are asked to review their inductions in order to improve this for future years. Again, that's not necessarily something we do for our staff. Incoming officers are asked what their expectations are quite early on in that process, so that staff can have an opportunity to reflect on that throughout the process and answer their questions throughout. I also think that incoming officers are given a list of people that they will need to know, either at an organisational level or specifically as part of their remit. And that's something that I don't think staff are given. A list of meetings and dates that these meetings take place. Now, this is something that I'm grappling with myself. I still don't know what meetings I'm supposed to be in, but it's my responsibility to seem to know that. And I think that one of the things that officers have that's really quite useful is a schedule that's sent to them in advance so that they can have a look at what it is that they need to do, have an idea about any training that they might need, and possibly undertake a skills audit in order to identify any other training that we can look at during that process. So that's some of the sort of best experiences that I've had in terms of induction and recruitment. And I would just like to give you an opportunity to take a couple of minutes to think about that for yourselves. And what do you consider to be good and bad induction or recruitment experiences? Thank you. Has anyone got any thoughts that they want to? Training and skills analysis for new starters is a great idea. Yes, very much so.
So go on, we'll just give you a minute to drop your experiences into chat and then we'll move on.
Oh, sorry about that, Christy. When did you start the job?
Great. Oh, it's really good. So there's some really good examples there of both good and bad recruitment or induction experiences coming into the chat box. Keep on sending those in if you're finishing off typing, and we'll have a read of those.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason we want to do that is obviously we want to ground kind of this session in your thinking around, you know, what makes a great induction, what makes a great recruitment experience, kind of irrespective of whether that's within or out, you know, or outside of lockdown. You know, some of those things are really important. So let's move on. Hopefully everybody who's here has an understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about recruitment and induction, but just to make sure we're all on a level playing field. Also, it's great to see, looking at some of the roles of people. We've got a really good mixture of people in kind of HR roles, but also people in kind of officer roles or student opportunities roles. We're going to be very much talking about this from the background of kind of recruiting and inducting employees, but there's probably lots of these lessons that are very, very relevant in terms of recruiting and inducting volunteers as well, or inducting officers, for example, into your organisation. So I think that's hopefully there's something in this for everybody who's attending. In terms of what good looks like, then we just wanted to set out our views in terms of what makes a great recruitment process, what makes a great induction process. Obviously, there's no one size fits all, but generally, when we're recruiting people, you know, we're looking for a diverse and talented range of people. We want to create a really positive experience for candidates in a recruitment process. We want to make sure that we're giving ourselves good data and good information so that we can make a really informed choice. You know, my view, and hopefully some of you agree, is that there is no more important decision we make than who we invite to come and work in our organisations. You know, if we fundamentally believe that people are our most important asset, then who you invite to come and work with you is absolutely critical. So this is something we really want to get right. And also this idea that it's a genuine two-way process as well, and a real opportunity for not just us to find the right people, but for applicants and candidates to get to know us. Yeah. And in terms of induction, you know, again, we want to really make sure during their induction that our new starters, we really reaffirm their view that they've made a smart choice joining our organisation. We want them to feel welcome. We want them to feel included. But we also want to start to equip them with the knowledge, the skills, the tools to be able to thrive and excel in their role. So when we're talking about what we've learned during lockdown over the next kind of 40 minutes, I want you to kind of hold these slides almost and hold these ideas, because what we're going to be doing is thinking about where things have worked or not worked against these as a framework. Okay. So a quick exercise for you now. We're going to start off talking about recruitment and selection, and we want to think about what is most effective as part of a recruitment and selection process. So on your screens, I have listed 8 different types of selection activity. Yeah, so a mixture of things there, ranging from structured interviews, unstructured interviews, work samples, personality tests. I would like all of you, so using the annotation tool, so in your bar at the top of the screen, you've got an annotate symbol, or hopefully you've got an annotate symbol, and I want you to either drop in a stamp or your initials or your name, and just pop it in there on this slide next to whichever one of these selection methods you think is the most effective. So I want you to tell me which of these 8 you think is the most effective selection method. Great, right, we've got a tick. I'm going to give you another 20 seconds. Right, okay, so there's been lots of evidence and lots of research done by HR people, including this particular study by Anderson and Cunningham-Snell, around how you predict which are the most effective selection methods. So what they did in this piece of research is they measured a whole host of recruitment processes, and then when people were appointed, they made an assessment about whether they were successful. So that was based on whether they were still in the role after 6 months, whether they were meeting expectations in terms of performance. And what they did is they ranked, basically they gave all of these assessment methods a percentage or a score as to how effective they were at predicting performance. Yeah, so if the score was 1, then it would mean it was accurate at predicting performance 100% of the time. So that would mean that if you use this particular method, you would always appoint somebody who went on to be effective. If it was 0, it would mean that you would never appoint somebody who went on to be effective. So we've got lots of ticks around structured interviews, lots of ticks around personality tests, a few around some of the others. So interestingly, so these are the scores, yeah? So the higher the score, or the closer to the score to 1, the more effective that assessment method is at predicting whether somebody appointed to a role will be able to perform. And as you can see, all of you apart from 1 are wrong. So assessment centres are the most effective method out of these. So what this means is that if you use an assessment centre methodology based on the research sample, that 68% of the time you would appoint somebody who went on to be effective. And the reason for that, and it's kind of logical when you think, is that assessment centres typically use a variety of methodology. So they'll typically involve some form of interview, some group work, maybe some form of work sample as well. Structured interviews, so the way we do things, typically, if you only use a structured interview, and that is all you do, you will probably on balance appoint a successful candidate less than half the time, which is pretty scary when you think about it, because that's what we do most of the time. Again, of course, most of us apply multiple methods, and that and that helps to improve the percentage chance of getting it right. So the reason why I share this is that, again, I think there's a really important lesson there, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, around using a variety of methodology in your recruitment to give you the best possible shot at getting the right decision. So what I'm going to do now, after I've cleared all the annotations, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about my experience during lockdown recruiting and selecting, and some of our lessons from that. So there's a couple of different recruitments that I've either managed or supported, including within our business, we've recruited a new consultant. I think she's on the call, actually. Antonia is joining us for this session. So hopefully she doesn't contradict me too much afterwards and say, no, it was all terrible. So one of the things that, both with our recruitment and the work that we've done with some of our clients, obviously for the past 4 months, it's been entirely carried out remotely. pretty much all using Zoom. And one of the things that we did with the process that we managed was trying to be really clear and communicate effectively up front that this would probably look and feel like a different process. We were honest about some of the ambiguity with that. So we said up front, we know that we're definitely appointing this role, and our plan is to continue that. But in terms of what the final stages of the interview look like, in terms of what the tasks might look like, they're probably going to look differently to what you're used to, but we don't yet know exactly what it'll look like, and we'll communicate with you and we'll update you as and when we've got a clearer idea of how we're going to manage that process. And one of the things that we did consciously is make a transition to a journey rather than an event. So rather than having kind of one final stage of the process that was an interview and a presentation and a written task, we kind of said, well, actually, let's just spread this out. So we know we want to take about 3 or 4 weeks to make this decision. So we paced it during that. So, and again, we tried to communicate to candidates and said, we'll start off with a relatively informal 30-minute Zoom interview. Then the second stage that came kind of a week or so down the line was we asked candidates to do a written exercise. So we gave them, I think, a day or a couple of days window where they produced a piece of work on a brief that we'd given them. And then we had a call after that, to kind of a 10-minute call to talk through it and debrief on it. Then there was a presentation, and then kind of the final stage was still an interview. So it probably contained most of the same ingredients that we'd have used kind of pre-lockdown, I suppose, but we spread it out more and made it much more paced, which from our perspective, A, we kind of probably had to do anyway, but B, it felt like a much less pressured or a much less intense kind of process as a result of that. And the other thing, I mean, again, I was quite skeptical when I went into this, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm sure some of you have possibly, you may have already been on this journey where you've realized how effective virtual recruitment could be. But I still probably had that element of skepticism where I was thinking, well, we can do interviews, via Zoom, fine. We can do the presentation, not a problem. But I'm not sure that I can offer somebody a job until I've shaken their hand and looked them in the eye. And of course, I now realise 3 or 4 months down the line that that's just utter nonsense. And that, we've both appointed somebody, and I've seen lots of organisations make some great recruitment choices. So, hopefully it will put paid to this myth that you need to look somebody in the eye before you offer them a job. And then so just to kind of give an overview of my view of some of the advantages or opportunities and disadvantages of risk. Obviously, the way we've done it has been cheaper. We've not been paying travel expenses for people jumping on the train or having overnight accommodation because we've had quite an intense process. It's felt more flexible for us and them, felt less rushed. We've used, I think we've taken our time to use a range of data in terms of making the decision that we've made. So that, it feels like there's been lots of benefits of kind of this approach. Clearly some disadvantages or risks as well. I think my biggest concern over the process remained that, if it's genuinely a two-way process, is the candidate still going to get a good feel for our culture and who we are and our values, kind of doing it virtually without getting to see a physical workplace? And I guess that still remains one of my concerns about the risks or disadvantages from taking the approach that we've taken. Right, I've talked enough now. Having talked about recruitment and my experience and kind of some of my observations, I'm going to hand over to Kalina, who's going to talk about her induction at Sunderland.
Thank you. Now, I would definitely not recommend changing jobs during a global pandemic to anyone. So if you're thinking about it, I would steer clear of that. Never having sort of experienced a COVID-based induction previously, and Sunderland Students' Union obviously never having delivered one, I think we got a number of things right, but there's definitely some learning that can be taken from that. So I, along with other staff, was asked about access to a computer or a laptop in advance, but probably not in sufficient time for them to be able to make arrangements if it was something that I needed. That's one of the assumptions, that actually we always get these things right and people can do these things. Some of my answers here, I'm going to talk for a while about sort of my experiences and some of the challenges there, so bear with me. But my answer effectively comes from the perspective that induction isn't necessarily a 1 week or 2 week process. To me, induction is something that happens from the start that you are recruited and start on day one up until almost you're given your probation and said, well done, yes, thank you, we think that you fit in this organisation. So bear with me as I talk through some of the sort of things on this screen, but some of the assumptions or things that I would have expected that didn't necessarily materialise. So I think, as sort of touched on in the chat, it's really important to have your schedule in advance. And actually, one of the issues that I had, and this is COVID related, I appreciate, but one of the assumptions that was made was that I could literally just start at 9 o'clock because that was business as usual. No one had necessarily taken into consideration that I had young children, even though I'd said explicitly throughout the interview process and in sort of subsequent conversations that that was the case. So a provisional timeline would have been useful that kind of indicated when my first one-to-one was scheduled, when objectives for the role were sort of preset, or whether that would be a more collaborative approach. Now I can appreciate that as the CEO, it was more likely to be the latter, and I would have to determine what my objectives were going to be. But ultimately, I'm not talking from that perspective. I'm talking about what happens for general staff. If it was a consultative process, when was that discussion likely to take place? So when did I think that I would have objectives that I could work on? And for me, it's really important, actually, when is your probation meeting? Because a lot of the time you get quite hung up about the fact that you have to have this job and this is what you're working towards, but when is that date? And so even in my mind now, I don't know when my probation is going to be. I had expected to meet with the CEO Management Committee, which is the subcommittee of the board that are responsible for my support and development. But that was something that was left to me to sort of arrange. And then that still wasn't possible for a number of weeks based on people's availability. Particularly for more senior roles, and you might argue that this is something that you should look at for yourself, but I would have expected to have important documents or links to these documents sent in advance. But I appreciate that that also puts additional pressure on you in your time before you start your role in your new organisation. So questions that I think are really important for anyone, really, not necessarily senior positions, are where is the organisation in its strategic planning cycle, and where is it in terms of the implementation of the plan? Where is it, and this is again a higher level role, and where is it in its appraisal cycle, or what is expected of me in terms of that? Are there any projects or relationships, either internally or externally, that require my immediate attention? And I think all of those things were missing. Whilst some of the things that I'm talking about are COVID related, I guess the context of this isn't. One of the things that I've already spoken about is the purpose of having more information in your recruitment pack to ensure that the candidates know what it is that you're about. And so something that we developed at De Montfort were recruitment principles, and those principles can range from anything, but we want to tell candidates that we blind shortlist. We want to tell candidates about the composition of the panel. We want to tell candidates that applications are welcome from underrepresented groups. And I sometimes think that there's an assumption behind all that. We want to tell people about our values and our strategic plan. And as I said before, I think that's really important because it sets out your intentions as an organisation. It sets out that you're transparent, and it's not something that should only be applied to successful applicants. As a result of recruiting our student trustees during lockdown, we delivered a whole board development day for the first time ever. And as someone kind of just commented, they were pretty zoomed out. It was quite intense, and I think on reflection, we shouldn't have done it that way. And there's just little things in that, like I had hoped that given time I would have sent them resources in advance, and I didn't get the opportunity to do so. But you kind of forget that if you're sharing the screen, it's really hard then for someone to read something alongside your presentation because they've got half a screen left. one definite positive from that experience was that my induction experience was sought after that process. And something that I've done for a very long time is something called first impressions, because I think when you recruit someone, you're asking them about their experiences to date, and then almost you give them the job and kind of almost forget that they had a job and they had a way of doing things. So what my first impressions document sets out is that after about 6 to 8 weeks in your organization, you're given carte blanche. You're given a piece of paper that says, tell me everything about this organization. Tell me the things that you think work. Tell me the things that you don't think work. Why is that? And arguably, this is a document that's shared, depending on who you are, with whoever you want. So it could be your line manager, it could be the CEO directly. And it's really important that people have an understanding that this document won't actually be used to kind of judge you in any way, but to have an understanding that I might have worked in an organisation, as I did at De Montfort, for 12 years, and I can no longer see the wood through the trees. So it's really important that someone else gives me those fresh perspectives. And it's, as sort of Graham said, you want to get the right person, you want to see what their views are, but you should also listen to those views. So that's something that we do within our organisation, but it literally gets them to talk to you about what they think, and rather than doing it during an exit interview, for example. So in terms of some of the key points about my induction at Sunderland itself, as you can see, some of these words are quite positive, some of these words are fairly negative, neutral, and some relate to sort of COVID. So it was a complete emotional roller coaster. Before I started, there was an irrational fear that I would have to renegotiate my contracts relatively quickly, because I didn't know whether they'd actually give me the job, and that I'd already handed my notice in one place but hadn't necessarily signed my contract in another. I was naive enough to believe that the situation would resolve itself relatively quickly, and my intention was to rent somewhere in Sunderland. And again, all of this added complexities to this conversation. I'm originally from Nottingham, and the intention was to move up to Sunderland, and actually it's quite scary to think of that. I was new to being a CEO, new to the city, and all sorts of things. I was fortunate enough to be able to meet with the CEO, the outgoing CEO, beforehand, but that was on my time. That was me sort of taking the opportunity to get up to her. And if you know anything about the distance between Nottingham and Sunderland, it's quite far, so it wasn't something that I could do fairly quickly. I wrote working from home versus attempting to work from home. And I think this is a really important thing to signify here, that actually there's still an expectation to spin the number of plates that would have been spinning already. Working from home is completely different if you've got children or if you've got caring responsibilities. And I think organisations needed to sort of take some flexibility on board with that. And actually, it's not necessarily just working from home. It's the flexibility that's the important sort of thing to sort of focus on here. I can recall the BBC correspondent who we all laughed at when his children ran into the room and his wife stealthily tried to get them out. But this became our reality, and this was something that actually, if you don't have children, you're not necessarily sort of too familiar with. I put in their assumptions. I didn't have the conversation about what my working hours would be, and that was quite important to me. I didn't also have the conversation about the organisation's leave policies, which would have been applicable to me from day one and would have helped me feel very welcome if I'd have been told that there were particular policies. In this instance, there weren't anyway, but that's not the point. Actually, some people, knowledge is power, and if you don't share that information, actually someone's at a loss because they're already at a disadvantage. We've kind of said, zoomed out, that was something that that happens very, very quickly. As part of my induction process, I purposely and consciously made the effort to sort of speak to all of the staff, to the presidents, to some of our trustees, to get an understanding from their perspective of what the organisation was like. And it wasn't necessarily that that was set in stone for me to do that, but something that I would have wanted to do. I also think there's that sort of strange time that people kind of think, oh, you can't be busy because you're working from home. And so actually we'll schedule a Zoom meeting with you. And this would have been ordinarily a conversation that you would have had in the corridor that may have taken 15 to 20 minutes. But in reality, you schedule an hour's meeting just to kind of have that conversation. And that's compounded by the fact that when you're a new starter, everyone seems to want to meet with you. I found myself going from observing to doing in a relatively short space of time. And I kind of thought that I needed to be very strategic very early on. And yet everyone else's priorities seemed to become my priorities. And so it's really important that you were able to kind of push back and say, this isn't my area, this isn't something that I need to do. I think whilst I'm encouraging other people to work smarter, I just ended up working harder. In here it says postponed probation, and that should really say extended probation, really. But ultimately, I made the conscious effort that actually I didn't want to be judged based on a period of time that I couldn't physically be in the office. So when I did get to speak to my management committee, we suggested that I had a longer probation period because of the difficulties. Relationships with the university is somewhere in there. Was relationships ultimately, I think I was in a fortunate position to have a relationship with the PVC based on our previous roles in previous institutions, and that helps no end. But it is really key to get those people on board quite early on. And I think, without being too disrespectful to my colleagues, it was really difficult to have an understanding of what they really felt about me. And there's that element of trust. And as it also says on the chart, working with unsuccessful candidates. Now, you're going to get that COVID or not COVID, and it's how you manage that. But the difficulty when you're not in the office to see those people face to face, to have that impact on those people, is really quite sort of difficult. I'm not going to talk too much more about all of those perceptions because there's lots, and I'm happy to take any questions. But unsafe security, I love that contradiction because it related to a sense of familiarity about being at home whilst making decisions that affect an environment that I'm distant from and have never actually been to. So a colleague made a similar comment about feeling judged by individuals disguised by their surroundings. And what I mean by that is the clothing that we wear might not necessarily be the clothing we wear in the office. Personally, I know that I wear my slippers. I'm not wearing them now, but I wear my slippers to conduct myself because it makes me feel comfortable. But does it make me feel too comfortable whilst trying to make me feel grounded in that sort of environment? And one of the massive problems that I found whilst working remotely, as Graham kind of touched on before, is IT problems. Now, I struggle with my IT, and I'm fortunate that you're looking at me straight on, but on a number of team meetings, my face was always on the side and I couldn't figure it out. And sometimes I just have to kind of hide my screen so that people wouldn't realize that I wasn't the right way around. And those are some of the things that you kind of just don't expect to have to deal with when you're dealing with some kind of distant relationship to the organization. So that's a kind of roundabout sort of challenge, a roundabout overview of my experience of being inducted at Sunderland. I wanted you to think about your experiences and to give you guys a couple of minutes to identify what your experiences are, and then we'll break out into rooms. Is that all right, Graham?
Yeah, sounds good.
Good. So just think about your experiences, either good or bad. As I've said, I've focused on the good, either recruitment related or induction related, and identify one thing that you might do different. Oh, that's not right. Sorry, I'm going to stop talking.
No, that's fine. So just if everybody takes two minutes and think about your own idea. So based on what we've talked about, your own idea for what you would do differently. And then in 2 minutes, we're going to send you off into some random breakout rooms of about 4 people. And then you're just going to share your thoughts in your breakout rooms before we pull you back. Okay? Okay, right. I'm about to open the breakout room so you can disappear. See you again in 4 minutes.
Did you want me to go into breakout room 3?
No, no, you're all right.
It's really strange. You know, like, I don't know if I can talk to you yet because can they still hear us? But I guess they
No,
can't.
no, we can talk now. It's just me and you.
Oh, Mark Stanley, whoever that may be, said, loving the very candid experience here. Yeah, hope you enjoy your future role. So that's quite nice. And
Yeah,
someone says, love the first impressions idea. Oh, you can see that, but Mark's was private message. That's nice. I think because I cut the slides, I didn't know if I was talking about the right thing in the right place. So, sorry.
No, it's fine. Going into the activity, we cut off. So there were a couple of the bits that I was going to talk through in terms of induction, but it doesn't matter. We've not. I think in terms of time, we're better going.
Oh no, I see where you are. Yeah, that's slide 16 that I've cut that off from. Yeah, no, sorry.
All right.
We'll go back and we can do it. They don't know that we did that, so that's what I like about training. How did I put it in there? No, I've written it down twice in my notes, but in the wrong place. So sorry.
It's all right. It's fine.
Can't believe the time's gone that quickly because I can talk that much, obviously.
How do you find it doing this on Zoom, Kalina? All right.
I think so. Yeah, I think one of the sort of sad things is you don't ever know how to read the room. Whereas I guess if you're face to face, you can. But I guess that's the whole sort of point of this topic, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, and it is. It's especially it's when you're sharing presentations as well. It's just impossible. So at least if you can read the room a bit based on facial expressions, can't you? If you've got it in kind of gallery mode. But when you're sharing a presentation,
yeah, there's only 4 of them. Yeah.
It's just impossible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've got to rely on them sharing their video. So obviously, names on screens don't mean anything, do they?
No, exactly.
Yeah. How are you finding it?
Yeah, fine. I quite like it, actually. The more, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's like the more you do of it,
yeah,
the easier it is to get the hang of. So we did some Luminous Spark personality training with Westminster, and me and Eleanor did it together, and it was great, really good, kind of really interactive, really good fun. But we split it out, so we didn't try and do it all in one day.
Yeah,
we did kind of a couple of 2-hour workshops, and we've got a follow up. I've got my last one actually tomorrow, and did stuff like sharing videos or links and stuff in between the sessions. Again, just to try and make it a bit more embedded.
Sounds good.
Right, I'm going to close the breakout rooms now.
Okay.
It's funny, you do like a 60-second countdown, so it counts down until everybody's chucked out.
Okay, sounds a bit like annual conference. That's the green light, the amber light, red. Stop talking, please, delegate. That's time, delegate, time. Those are some memories.
Okay, great. So we've got everybody coming back in now. So I'll share screen again. Okay, so hopefully you had some useful conversations there, some interesting conversations, and it helped you to kind of reflect in terms of some of your thinking. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to very quickly summarize some of our learning and what we think we're going to do differently, and then we're just hopefully going to have kind of 5 minutes at the end for any kind of questions about that. So in terms of recruitment, again, I think the key takeaways from me are that I will never again be in a position where I've got a kind of a final assessment day or interview day where I'm meeting 5 or 6 people in person, face to face, for the first time, and that is the final stage of a process. You know, I mean that's now a red line for me. Even if it's just having a couple of stages to the process where I do long list interviews via Zoom, even for relatively junior roles, I would always do that now going forward, and then get it down to maybe 2 or 3 candidates for a final in-person kind of meeting or interview. And I just think, you know, I think that will come hand in hand with a much more phased approach, I think. So that would always be my plan now, to think about having a more kind of a much more flexible, much more phased, a much more agile process, I think, in the future. And look, we've all been in those positions where kind of you're doing a face-to-face interview that's going to last for an hour, and within the first 5 or 10 minutes, you know, oh, actually, this is not going well. This is not going to end well. So this, for me, is the perfect opportunity to make sure that never has to happen again through doing that. I think, you know, again, I think from this I will take a much. I think from this I will take a much more flexible approach going forward as well. So again, in the past, I think where I've had a view which is, well, we'll set the interview date and we'll ask people to select a time, but if they can't make the day when we're doing interviews, that's tough. You know, again, I'm now thinking, well, why would I do that? Because actually, if we can have more flexibility that can work around people's lives and still get great outcomes, and that means that we've got a broader talent pool and hopefully a more diverse talent pool, then why put in place these kind of barriers as part of that? And the other thing that it's really got me thinking about are what might be the opportunities to help candidates get a feel for the organisation that don't necessarily involve them coming in for an assessment day. So that might be a virtual tour, but it also got me thinking, well, again, if we're doing a lot more stuff via Zoom in the future, you know, why wouldn't we invite final stage candidates to come and sit and observe a team meeting via Zoom, for example, the things that might help them get a feel for what the culture of the organisation's like before making a final decision. So they were kind of a few aspects of my learning and what I'd plan to do differently in the future, I think. Kalina, induction.
Okay. Thank you. I guess if inductions are done right, they can lead to sort of more creativity and be less tick boxy, less formulaic. Whilst discussing this with Graham, we were saying, has your induction at Sunderland been more flexible than it would have been? Have you enjoyed it more? And I kind of went, no, I don't think I have, actually, being quite honest. I think that personally, my induction was scheduled in a way that didn't necessarily give the time to be sort of flexible. And I've sort of struggled with that. I kind of found that I wasn't able to do the processing. I didn't have processing time. I didn't have thinking time. And I still, in some cases, don't have thinking time. I'm not able to read as much as I would like. I guess one of the disadvantages is that it's really hard to integrate with the culture when you kind of aren't there. You don't know what it looks like. It's really hard to spot the talent in the organisation to see who can change things. But it does present us with an opportunity to think differently. And I think it's really important that we sort of focus on that. So as Graham kind of touched on, there's this chance to do things differently. And I sort of thought about considering the variety in terms of what it is that you do. So having a much more blended sort of outcome to that. So rather than just saying, these are the things you need to read and you need to see Joe blogs at this time and Jane Doe at this time, actually, are there other sort of opportunities, other resources that are available? Are there podcasts or videos or reading or self-reflection activities that I think that I was missing that you can kind of pick up on? Consider how to use your time more effectively. And that is the point of, actually, let's not say you need to do A, B, and C by a particular time, but arguably by the end of the week, we want to kind of catch up with you to see how you're getting on with these particular things, and use your time the way that you would want to. Considering who to involve in a process. So for example, as I touched on, the assessment centre day approach that we used to use at De Montfort meant that staff had an opportunity to engage with more people, and that was during the recruitment. But actually, why can't that be part of the induction process too? Student unions aren't in competition with each other. So why is it that you know of a certain member of staff that is in a similar role? Why can't they speak to each other and see what it is from a different perspective? Because why should staff always have to believe your perspective on what it is? And actually, in some ways, that might be quite insightful, because another staff member at another students' union can tell you where they think your union strengths or weaknesses are in a way that your union wouldn't necessarily do. Consider how to involve new staff in their own induction. So as I touched on before, with officers, we kind of say, is there anything that you want to get out of this period of time? Actually, how can we embed that? And then create opportunities to connect with peers in other organisations using remote technology. I think I kind of touched on that. But there's a number of things that people can do to kind of make this process work for them more than the organisation. And I think we kind of talk about recruitment being a two-way process. Induction should be too, and staff should have the opportunity to feel more connected, because as Graham said earlier, that is the whole purpose of inductions, the making you feel welcome, removing the Christmas decorations from under your desk in February, that kind of thing. So actually, we do have an opportunity here to think differently about how we welcome people into the organisation.
Okay, great. So you'll be pleased to know that's it from us. So we have managed to save 3 minutes for questions. So if anybody's got any questions, observations, feedback, drop your name into the chat bar and we'll give you a shout. Okay, 10 seconds. Okay, right, I think we've escaped without any questions, Kalina.
Wow, that's because I talk too much.
Hopefully that means we've answered any questions that you might have had during the actual session. So just want to say a massive thank you from both of us for joining. Hope that you found that useful. Feel free to get in touch with either of us on kind of social media or afterwards if there's anything kind of questions or ideas that you've got that you want to follow up. But and enjoy the rest of the conference as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Take care.
Thank you. You're more than welcome, Emma. Thank you.